Okay, today we'll talk about something related to the 12th of January, and maybe the subject is a little bit strange, but I learned that Stalin, apparently, the dictator, the Russian or the Soviet dictator, used for the first time his name Stalin. He used to have many pseudonyms in the past, but he chose to use Stalin on the 12th of January. And he kept it until the end of his life. And Stalin seems to mean the man of steel. That's because Stali, without an N, means steel in Russian. And this made me think of Eisenman, Peter Eisenman, who was not born on January 12th, but whose name is translated, in German or from German. If we add an N, just like in the case of Stalin, the man of iron or Iron Man. So I thought, let me think a little bit about this. On one hand, the man of steel, the steel man, and on the other hand, the Iron Man. And also today, in 2010, 13 years ago, it took place the terrible earthquake in Haiti, when approximately 160,000 people died. But first, let's see some images of Stalinist architecture, which we kind of know because we live in a country that knew communism. But like a quick aide-memoire, let's see a few images. And then I will show images of the earthquake in Haiti, and then architecture from Peter Eisenman. So we know Soviet architecture. It is an architecture that proclaims, symmetry, order, control, authority, and it's very persuasive in this sense. We have in Bucharest Casa Scântei, built in a similar way, not so tall, but still, proclaiming the above mentioned attributes. Here we see a monument dedicated to Stalin, which is inconceivable in Europe or in general in the world in the year 2023, maybe not totally inconceivable in, let's say, North Korea, maybe. But this kind of so-called architecture for the people was not for the people at all. After all, at the top of this tower, we don't see the people. We see one man with an incredible scale. I mean, as architects, you can easily approximate the height of that immense statue. Anyway. So this is Stalinist architecture, apparently powerful, apparently, advocating order, and, even, I would hesitate to use the word serenity because it's not really a serene architecture, but it's about, comforting the masses that everything is under control. Obviously, not everything is under control, and we have the very proof not too far away from where we are at the war in Ukraine. I mean, if we oppose, in fact, I could have showed images of Ukraine now after it was bombed instead of the Haitian earthquake. But in one case, nature provoked the disaster. In the other case, man provoked that disaster. And again, someone emerging from communism. It's an architecture without glory, really. I mean, it's an architecture that depresses one with its falseness, because it is false, this sense of order. It was not order, it was dictatorship. It was dictatorship, and this is an imposed, it's a forced order. It's not a natural or organic order. Now, we see the project for the palace of the Soviets done by this architect, Yofan, I don't know the other two who they were, but we'll see 2 or 3 projects by Johan, a man who served the regime very, very well. And we already saw actually an image of this, you know, it was the monument to one man, maybe Lenin, maybe Stalin, but all in all, this abstracted new pharaoh, you know, it's terrible. It's terrible because this is the apotheosis of Anthropocene, you know, the inflation of the human chest and the human body and the human being in the name of what? In the name of falseness. Now look at the Soviet pavilion at the Paris Expo, 1937, the same architect, Boris Johan. You know, at least here, I imagine there are two beings, like in, you know, the icon or the logo of the Russian or Soviet films, you know, with the man and the woman. Actually, a great sculptress, a woman, sculpted that. Here, what we see, I don't know. It was placed on top of that building, you know, showing the new man and the new woman, if they were indeed new. Another scene of, you know, Soviet or Sovietistic, I almost felt like say, sorry about this salami thing. Here we see other pictures of Soviet architecture, all proclaiming order, stability, you know, confidence, and so on. But we know very well the misery that hid behind these buildings. We have an example, mega example in Romania too, no? The so-called Casa Poporului. I don't know if you noticed, but that boulevard that goes into Casa Poporului has on both sides, you know, apartment buildings, and at the bottom, stores. Most of them are deserted, abandoned, some even vandalized. Why is it that that majestic boulevard has no active, you know, commerce there? You know, that why isn't there life in those stores? I think it's a good question. Not to speak about another good question. Why is it that right in front of Casa Poporului, there are homeless people living in unbelievable conditions, you know, even in you know, metallic containers that are meant for garbage, or right there in front of the majestic palace. And here we see another majestic palace, the palace of the you know, the victory of the people over you know, the arch enemy. But the arch enemy, you know, well, they were killed, they left the country, and I'm not glorifying them either. You know, it seems we replace one system with another. But actually, this building that you look at, I put it here intentionally because this is not in Soviet Union and it's not in Russia. It's actually in New York. You know, so there are some resemblances between, you know, Stalinist or Stalinistic architecture and capitalistic architecture. And you can see such things in Detroit as well, the capital of the T model by Monsieur Ford. This was been, I think, in Lithuania also during the time of Stalin. Of course, this is the subject of a, you know, possible PhD paper, you know, Stalinist architecture. And I imagine some people already wrote such papers. Anyway, but what do we see here? We see an architecture that loved symmetry, loved rigidity, loved control, and loved giving you the illusion that everything is fine. But life is much more complex, and it cannot be squeezed into the rigid framework of Stalinism. This kind of building is also you know, known to us because we have Casa Radio now in Bucharest, and you know, other so-called palaces built by you know, the mega president who got shot in 1989. Anyway, socialist, I mean, Stalinist architecture, Stalinist architecture. But the bizarre thing is that Stalin apparently, when he was very young, was a child or a teenager, he wanted to become a priest and he wrote a lot of poetry. How do you explain it that this dictator, because of whom millions died, he actually wrote poetry and enjoyed poetry? This is to me incomprehensible. Stalinist architecture. Now we go to something very different. So on one hand, we had the so-called powerful architecture of built by the people and for the people, when in actuality it was built by a dictator for the dictator. And now we look at the misery of human life when a terrible natural disaster comes upon us or upon it. You know, all the glory of those symmetrical palaces of Stalin are find a tragic, dichotomic, you know, opposition in this. So on the same earth, which we know now is not flat, at least this is what science tells us, that the earth is not flat and is not supported by 4 elephants at the corners, but it is round. So on this very earth, on one hand, we have this, no, glorious architecture, and then on the other, of course not at the same time, but sometimes even at the same time, we have this total disaster. Deaths, 160 people died. We had something like this in Bucharest as well, as you know. So, you know, how do you negotiate between this and that? How do you negotiate? Both things happened, well, both things. Stalin chose to be called the man of steel. Stalin in 1913 on the 12th of January. On the 12th of January in 2010, Haiti was transformed to, you know, to ashes, so to speak, by this terrible, terrible, terrible earthquake. And in between, maybe we can reflect on the work of Peter Eisenman, which I will try to do next, after I show a few more images of despair and of terrible, you know, disarray that brought Haiti to its knees. Nature can be violent indeed, but unfortunately man can be violent too, no? I mean, we saw images with what is happening in Ukraine, and this in the 21st century, this in Europe, this after the Second World War. How do you explain it? So Russia went through the Second World War when it lost millions of people. And now Russia is bombing its brothers because they say that Ukrainians are Russians, actually. That Ukraine is its land, filled with its people, and they bomb Ukraine. So do you understand the levels of madness that human beings are capable of? In this case, we can blame nature. Okay, it was an earthquake. It was not dependent on the human will. And it's true. And it's a terrible sight. But what provoked the long war which started last year in February in Ukraine? We see such scenes in Ukraine too. Well, maybe the buildings are a little bit different, but the level of destruction in some places is equal to what we look at here. How are you going to build in a world which is capable to be struck by both disasters, the natural disaster and the human disaster? I once wrote the text of a competition, a house for Peter Eisenman in Haiti. because I don't think Peter Eisenman would have flirted with deconstruction if he was subjected to the terrible disaster in Haiti, or if he lived in Haiti at the time when the earthquake happened. In a way, the architecture of Peter Eisenman and some other deconstructivists was a reaction to maybe too much comfort, too much, serenity, no drama, no earthquakes, a fine, fine living, and then you flirt with terror, because Peter Eisenman said, "En terror firma." Well, he played with the words. Instead of "en terra firma," with the feet strongly anchored in the earth, and terror firma, with the feet strongly anchored in terror. And I'll try to elaborate a little bit on that in a few minutes when we start the Peter Eisenman presentation. But this is what we look at here is the deconstruction of the work of man by the turbulent forces of nature. And look at this former palace. But what happened in Haiti will happen sooner or later to almost every building built by human beings, including the Egyptian pyramids. And this awareness should be present in our minds, because we do not build for eternity. Nothing lasts for eternity. So we are happy-go-lucky, we are optimistic, we erect and erect, taller and taller, but one day what is tall will come down to the earth and will become what we look at now, unfortunately. Of course, Haiti was poor. Yes, maybe the buildings were not built properly, and maybe some of them fell quite easily. But even a pyramid becomes eroded in time. Again, would the deconstructivist architect build a deconstructed building in Haiti, in Haiti in 2011 or after the earthquake? I doubt it. But if you are bored, if you are, tired of too much comfort, too much verticality, too much no drama, too much of everything, you begin to deconstruct your buildings. It's probably, in the human nature to turn even against ourselves when things become too settled. Look at the eyes of this girl. Just look at the eyes of this girl. Can we comprehend her suffering? Maybe she lost her parents, her brothers, her sisters. When a few years ago, I asked a friend, a young architect, to publish on Facebook, because I don't use Facebook, a picture with, victims of the Hiroshima bombing. He sent the picture to Facebook on his account. He published it. He wanted to publish it, and he received a message from Facebook that his account was blocked, was frozen for 48 hours, because he was not allowed to send for publication indecent pictures. Facebook considered that a picture, Facebook probably would consider even this picture as being indecent. They considered that the dead bodies of the Japanese who died because of the atomic bomb, that picture was indecent. What do you mean indecent? Indecent was the atomic bomb, but the word indecent is not strong enough. This alarms me. Facebook is actually deleting truth. So his account was blocked for 48 hours because he had the nerve, so to speak, to send for publication an indecent picture with dead bodies, yes, of after the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. It's terrible. And people are addicted to Facebook. But Facebook is not telling the truth about life and about the world. What is so-called uncomfortable is not published. We only talk about kittens, about color pink, about happy-go-lucky events. Only these things. Nothing uncomfortable. Maybe even this picture would not be published because it would be considered indecent. This one as well. It's very, very without decency. Unbelievable. That's why I thought perhaps another company could be established called deface.com. Not Facebook, but defacebook. To tell the other side of the story, the one that Facebook refuses to acknowledge and to make known. And I think this is the last image of this short visual material about the earthquake in Haiti in 2010 on this very day, the 12th of January. And now we go to talk a little bit about Peter Eisenman and to see if there might be some relationship between Stalin, Haiti, and him. It's an attempt to create some bridges, probably where very few people would see anything, relating. But just a second. So Peter Eisenman, just a second. I don't know. Something happened to Zoom yesterday, and now I have difficulties to. Okay. I will go very quickly because this is a long presentation. Initially, I didn't want to talk about his larger work. Why did I include Eisenman in the presentation today? Because of this kind of similarity with the name of Stalin. Stalin means the man of steel. Eisenman means in German the man of iron or Iron Man. So you have the steel man, Stalin, and you have Iron Man, Eisenman. Strangely, a strange coincidence, both names, Stalin and Eisenman, need an N at the end. Eisenman has one, but to be truly rigorous linguistically, in German, you have to put another N there. And then Eisenman means the Iron Man. Why will Stalin, the word Stali without an N means steel. So, no, actually in the case of Stalin, you have to subtract an N. Yes, sorry, I had it wrong. In the case of Stalin, you remove the N and you give it to Eisenman. And then you have the steel man and the Iron Man. Why am I showing this? I don't know what this is, but it looks interesting. Everything that moves stirs me up. Now you see here, this is a book published on Peter Eisenman called From Formalism to Weak Form, the Architecture and Philosophy of Peter Eisenman. And indeed, for a number of years, when I was in New York City, at that time, Peter Eisenman, and I've heard him in a few conferences talking, for a long time about weak architecture. Now, we saw on one hand the so-called strong architecture of Stalin, the steel man. And then we saw the so-called weak architecture of Haiti after it was demolished by that terrible earthquake. And now we see Peter Eisenman philosophizing about a weak form. Why do you think he was attracted by what is called or might be called weak form? The way Eisenman worked, and I think he still does. I think he turned 90 this year, and if not 90, 89. but he's still kicking, so to speak. And he's studying Alberti, which I admire. I admire that a former deconstructivist studies very, very passionately Alberti at 90 or almost 90. So Peter Eisenman said that an architecture project should always start with a grid, like we see here, the grid, right on the left at the bottom. But then he distorts it. He distorts the project, he distorts the grid, because he's not happy with probably with the predictability and rationality of that grid. And we see here a few diagrams, a few sketches of various projects by him. I actually think his first houses are rather interesting, which were very, very abstract. And here we see later works, the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, the Santiago City of Culture. We are going to see these buildings. On the left, the bottom, the Max Reinhardt House. I regret it was not built. A project, I think, which would have been impressive, but it was not built. Here he is, Peter Eisenman, and in the back, Kenneth Frampton. I don't know who was the owner of that bicycle. They both returned to the States from Great Britain, where Peter Eisenman studied at Oxford, and they met there. And the American Peter Eisenman invited the British Kenneth Frampton to come to the States. Now here we see a picture of Michael Graves and Peter Eisenman on the right. Michael Graves died, but they were at that time part of the New York Five group, the other three being John Haydock, Charles Guedmy, and Richard Meyer. Richard Meyer, who is a cousin of Peter Eisenman. Actually, again, here, Peter Eisenman with, what is that? Some kind of a Vitruvian man, but with a kind of a split in the middle, or is a woman instead of a man. Anyway, here he is at the Institute of Architecture and Urbanism in New York, a school he founded with some adoring probably students around him, or who knows, maybe they were not adoring. Here we see him on the left, and on the right, Peter Eisenman, on the right, John Haydock, but I don't know who the lady is. Maybe Diana Agrest, but I'm not sure. Here we do not see Peter Eisenman, but we see on the right another member of the New York Five, Charles Guedmy on the right, then Tadao Ando in the middle, and on the left, Toyo Ito, two Japanese who both received the Pritzker Prize, as you know. And here, Peter Eisenman on the left. Now, here is a picture with heroes of North American architecture from left to right. Frank Gehry, Charles Moore, Philip Johnson, Stanley Tigerman, Robert Stern, and in the back on the right, Peter Eisenman, that Charles Guedmy, Cesar Pelli, and on the left, on the top, Michael Graves. Peter Eisenman, deconstructing with Peter Eisenman, Mr. In Between, as he was called, and I'll try to explain why. Here we read the Eisenman principle. Peter Eisenman made his name dreaming up impossible buildings. Now he gets to build them. Some people thought that this was an act of going down when he started to build. I don't think so. I think ideally an architect should confront his ideas with with the elements, with the life of society, of people, and build. Although building means polluting, but what can we do? But look at this. He was asked, or he was asked to give an advice to the young, and he said this, and I agree with him. He says, unless you are really committed to being an architect in the true sense of the word, it's a terrible business, and I wouldn't recommend it for anybody, unless you need to do it for some personal reason. I would say go into business, go into law, medicine, but don't be an architect. He's right. If you don't have passion in your soul for architecture, don't do architecture. If you want to earn more money, you can earn more money with business, with law, with medicine, as other things, maybe even become a priest or a nun. But if you have that virus in you, the beautiful love for architecture, do architecture and don't care about anything else. Just listen to your passion, to your soul, because your soul knows. It knows. Your heart knows if you enjoy it or you don't enjoy it. But if you don't enjoy it, move out of it. The architecture we remember is that which never consoles or comforts us. Let's read again, because this is totally against what the functionalist thinks. The architecture we remember is that which never consoles or comforts us. Didn't I tell you that he wrote "en terror firma"? In other words, strongly, solidly, firmly, rooted in terror. We can think about this, because he made this statement from living very comfortably in Greenwich Village in New York, having no earthquakes, having fame, having money, teaching, being adored, and so on. But if he lived in Haiti, I'm not sure he would have wrote this. Nor if he lived under Stalin. Well, he didn't. Now here he says, my wife has her stuff and her taste, and I have my stuff and my taste. I don't know. They're not a very idealistic statement. I go over because Richard Meyer is not so interesting, and he says something very, very commonplace. I believe architecture connects the present with the past and the tangible with the intangible. But the last part, that it connects the tangible with the intangible, is interesting, because what is the intangible? Maybe the intangible is exactly that unmeasurable that Louis Kahn talked about. Or maybe it's the same thing with what Geme Cantacuzino, the important Romanian architect, referred to when he said the architect serves both man and his gods. What gods? Well, the gods are related to the intangible world. But who are they? Do we still believe in gods? But do we still believe in the intangible? Do we still believe in the metaphysics of architecture? Do we still believe in the unmeasurable, as Louis Kahn called it? Here we see Peter Eisenman play chess, I imagine, or I don't know what they do there with Rob Creer. In a way, he's very opposite from all points of view, because Robert Leo Creer was maybe still is the architect of Prince Charles and advocating postmodernism, while Peter Eisenman wouldn't have postmodernism at all. But it's kind of strange that, and I think they were friends in some way, although they are totally opposite. Here is him with Mark Wigley, the theoretician who ran Columbia University for 15 years after Bernard Tschumi left Columbia University. Here he is again. Here he is again. This is a collage of pictures from the Institute of Architecture and Urbanism in New York, and they published a very influential series of magazines, books. They are not really magazines, maybe they are not really books, but very, very fine publications called Oppositions. And I do believe that you see the Midtown Architecture Institute, the Institute of Architecture and Urbanism, flowering as a student mecca. Why? Because because I think many young people need creativity, need even outrageous ideas. They need to discover, they need to have the freedom to explore, to become pioneers, to have the feeling that architecture is an adventure, and is an adventure, and if it is not an adventure, it's the most boring thing in the world. Here they are with Leon Creer again, and I like very much the way Peter Eisenman laughs. Here is a man at least 70, maybe close to 80 years old, but the way he laughs is very young and very encouraging for the idea that as Le Corbusier said, the challenge in life is not to remain young, but to become young. And it seems that maybe Peter Eisenman did become young, at least in this picture. Anyway, here is Jacques Derrida, the famous French philosopher. He wrote a book together with Peter Eisenman. Again, Jacques Derrida, the deconstructivist par excellence, because deconstruction came to architecture from philosophy and literature, and Jacques Derrida was quintessential in this respect. Here he is with his students, maybe at Yale, the cube, the grid, too many of them, drawings done when he was young, Peter Eisenman, but we see cubes and then we see them deconstructed, meaning fragmented. House number 3. I like these early works by Peter Eisenman. They probably were not so loved by his clients because they probably had some functionalist problems, but I like their abstractness and the fact that in a way they are relentlessly searching for the otherness that they were not. This is house number 3 from 1970. Exasperations of the cube, because you see he started with a cube here on the upper left corner, now here, and then look where he arrived, which we see here. So this was his technique. You start with a solid, you start with a certitude, you start with the grid and the cube, or the square and the cube, and then you rotate it, you fragment it, you cut it, you torture it, and then you are a little bit happier, perhaps. Anyway, it's a technique, kind of eating his own tail. But there was then a certain form of mad idealism, the abstractness of the house shows it. I mean, look at this beam that crosses the room diagonally and goes all the way up. I think architecture is nice when it surprises you too, when you move out of habit, of predictability, arriving at the unknown. House number 6, another house. Now here there are some outrageous things. Just look here. He created this immensely narrow, if I can say something like this, space between these two walls. This is like a kitchenette, perhaps, or no, it's just a place where you wash yourself. Yeah, a sink, and then you have the bathtub. But why would he create 2 rooms out of 1? And separated by a so narrow space. And then you have this wall, which maybe there was a beam going through this wall and then ending into the empty space in between these 2 walls. And then we see this theme also here and also here. I mean, these are peculiarities. Certainly what he did here is very uncommon, and the functionalist would shudder, would tremble, would protest, would scream. But Peter Eisenman didn't care about it. And look here, a very interesting kitchen. Now, so we have the stove, and we have the sink, so we have water, and we have fire. And in between fire and water, he places these 2 columns, and then the empty space that we saw in the previous plan. Very interesting, no? But again, totally contradicting many things, especially those having to do with with functionalism or function. Here too, again, these cuts, these rifts into the flesh of the building, which actually I think makes the building interesting and maybe irritating as well. This is the building. I like it. It's tormented. The geometry is tormented. He was obviously not happy with a placid cube, here we see now, maybe this is a metaphor for the, the difficult relationship sometimes, a couple has. I mean, the partners of a marriage or of a relationship. So between the two beds, you have this, more than suggested, actually realized space, including a frontier of light in a way. I mean, it's like in his statement, my wife has her stuff and I have my own stuff. Well, this is kind of what we see here. It doesn't seem to be, the quintessential happy architectonic image of a, celestial marriage. Color opposites, green and red, who would do something like this? But why not? He was experimenting, right? He was experimenting. Maybe his experiment provoked the exasperation of the clients, and I did read something in this sense. But the problems of the architect were extended to the lives of the clients, thanks to the generosity of the clients to accept the challenge. You see here the rift in the wall. Again, this kind of break, this kind of rift, cutting a wall in this way is not occurring very often in architecture. You see it here. This is actually one room, but he divided into two. You remember, here was the sink, and here the bathtub and the toilet. But this is actually one bathroom, cut in half. Now, what is the symbolism or the metaphor of this cut? I will let you reflect on it. You see it here. It's interesting, no? I mean, you could say architecture should be more than being interesting, and I would agree with you. But I think it is preferable to make something at least interesting than to make something boring or predictable. The drawings themselves are, good graphic works. Peter Eisenman thought that drawing is more architecture than the built work based on the drawing. A debatable statement, but this is the statement of someone who believed in the purity of the concept, in the purity of the graphic representation of a certain concept, architectural concept. Because, confronting yourself with the building site, with the misery of the dust of the building site and all the other constraints and so on, the so-called concept, a word which I avoid, but, many architects use it, including Rem Koolhaas, that so-called concept, in order to preserve its purity, probably it has to remain at the level of the representation, the graphic representation. But this is not a commercial rendering, as you can see. No, this is more like an abstract artwork. And here is the building. I like these steps here, and I don't know if this is the contribution of Peter Eisenman, but if it is, it shows some complexity, because you wouldn't expect, considering the architecture, which is very geometrical and abstract, to have, this kind of 3 steps from 3 big stones, as if you are at Katsura in Kyoto. No, but I like them. Whoever put them there, I like the fact that they did so. Anyway, I go quickly because we still have to see some other works by Peter Eisenman, and I'm beginning to lose the connection with Haiti and Stalin, but maybe not. I could still verbalize a little bit about, but it's paradoxical, no? Because the Iron Man, no, in his architecture has nothing in common with the Steel Man. Or what if he was a steel hand in a velvet glove? That might be possible too. I'm not going to read this. You see, at the time of the construction, he was known almost exclusively as a theorist and paper architect. promulgating a highly formalist approach to architecture he called post-functionalism. But he called post-functionalism in 1975, 1970. So that is 50 years ago. He was talking about post-functionalism. We should think a little bit about it. I am mad at functionalism. I think it ruined architecture. A model of Cannaregio project with House 11A at different scales, 1978. This was a project that never came into being. But look what he did, is the same house at different scales in different places in Venice. You see it in the plan. Of course, the grid is still present because he cannot breathe without his beloved grid. You see these squares here. And then the corners, some corners, he places this house at different scales. And this was supposed to be the house. I like its geometric viscerality, and in a way it's madness. But you see, these men who in a way appear to be so removed from so-called reality actually proved he can build. He built a lot. And I read that he contemplates at 90 to return to building. At 90. You see, displacement between solid and void, trace and frame, imprinting solids, all the exasperations of the formal language of architecture, from formalist to weak form, the architecture and philosophy of Peter Eisenman. We look at some of the plans of these houses, house 2, house 3, house 4, house 5, house 6, other projects which we are going to see later on in detail. Cora L works, it's actually Coral works, Jacques Derrida, and we saw a picture of Jacques Derrida, in fact, 2 pictures, and Peter Eisenman. I have this book, and it has penetrations where you see the reddish spots. These are actually square holes through the book, going through all the pages, from the front cover to the back cover. Literally, square openings into all the pages of the book. They broke the book in this way. Wexner Center for the Arts, Columbus, here he explored already the ideas of a weak architecture. It existed an armory here, which he reconstructed in this infuriatingly frigid work, by the way, frigid way. By the way, somebody said about the work of Peter Eisenman that it is, how is it called, decaf architecture. You know, like decaffeinated coffee. It's decaffeinated architecture. It smells like it, it tastes like it, but it isn't it. And here we see an example. You know, there is something frigid and artificial. Yes, he kept the ghost of the old building rebuilt, but in a very, I don't know, kind of frigid way, decorative way. And then he came with these grids, you know, exasperating the remnants of the old building that he reconstructed. And we see the tension between the two, the lack of historical fidelity in the reconstruction of the armory, the fragmentation of the form, and the insertion of dark glass into the voids left between these fragments seems to speak of the disjointed manner in which we reflect the past, and in turn it serves to remind us of a past we have lost and can never return to. Perhaps the word disjointed should be remembered, because indeed his architecture is an architecture of disjointments or disjunctions. This is the Wexner Center for the Arts, and look at graphic representations of what he was to bring to that building. The exasperations of a troubled soul and a troubled mind, distorting geometry and distorting the grid. So in his own premeditated way, he tried to bring to the building um, deconstruction, to fragment it, to problematize it. There was no earthquake there, but Eisenman provoked his own cerebralist so-called earthquake, which is not an earthquake because it's based on the grid. But with this grid, he manipulated some distortions within the building. Unfortunately, still whitish, and there is there is this equidistant row of columns, but you still see, an effort to sabotage the grid. I don't know what that man is doing there and how he arrived there, but he did. Anyway, this is the building. Greater Columbus Convention Center. This is a huge building, almost undecently huge, which he tried to fragment. And we see here the, I mean, it's truly an inhumanly huge building, which he tried to dissect and fragment. And maybe it was a good attempt, but to what extent this is a truly serious architecture, I don't know. Well, we see here also the arrival of ornament, because what he does here is of an ornamental nature. No, I mean, what are these, squares and cubes, and they are of an ornamental nature. They are not of a structural nature. You will see some apocalyptical images from the inside. Look, like, for me, this is apocalyptical. Look at this immense number of identical tables with identical chairs all around them. You can imagine, here you have, I don't know how many hundreds of people, if not more. It's really maddening. Anxieties plus minus strategies. Yes, indeed. Anxieties plus minus strategies. Strategies towards an increased anxiety, or towards what? This is the building. I mean, you can probably place the, whole village, if not a little town. It's immense. Columbus, Ohio. And the white shadows or ghosts of those people. Now, another building, Novo Center for Design and Art, the Cincinnati Architecture School, which I actually saw about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I have to tell you, this building was in great repairs after, I don't know, maybe 20 years when what is built. Yeah, about 20 years after it was built. The architecture school in Cincinnati, and it's a good architecture school. The building is this building designed by Peter Eisenman. We see here also, sloping planes and disjunctions and rifts and so on. It's a building which tries to make you uneasy, because he thought and he thinks that too much comfort and too much, Neufert righteousness could make you very uncreative. And maybe he is right. But the colors are a little bit too soothing, the colors of a rather, heavy birthday cake. But they are not very Nietzschean or Zarathustrian, these colors. But the buildings attempt to create discomfort. I don't know if it's really that terror firma that he advocated. The interiors are approximately okay, approximately. So this is the Cincinnati School of Architecture. This is not by him. This is the Museum of Contemporary Art by Zaha Hadid, also in Cincinnati. One of the early works done by Zaha Hadid. This is the drawing of the Cincinnati School of Architecture by Peter Eisenman. So, in a way, he mimics some kind of a mental earthquake, or some kind of an earthquake, which didn't happen naturally, but happened because of the, the anxieties of the architect. And this was his strategy. Now, this work was not built in Frankfurt Biocenter. It was not built. Now, this one was built in Tokyo. And here it is. Was it struck by an earthquake? No. Although we know that Tokyo has and Japan has plenty of earthquakes. And yet they were not afraid to build something like this that was already in a way tormented by some kind of an earthquake to an extent. So Peter Eisenman in Japan, we are going to see, yes, another building also in Japan. This one also, you would say, ready to fall almost, but it didn't, and it will not. I'm sure its structure is properly done. Interesting that Japan builds so adventurously when it has powerful earthquakes and tsunamis and so on, not to speak about nuclear disasters because of a tsunami or an earthquake. But they are still very adventurous in the art of building. Okay, so this is in Japan. Japan, Peter Eisenman, and now Checkpoint Charlie project in Berlin from 1980. He didn't build something spectacular here, but he did build the Holocaust Museum, which is a good work. The plan for IBA social housing, 1981, 1985. It looks more like a hospital or even some school project in Bucharest. Across the street from here is a building by Rem Koolhaas. Here it was the Checkpoint Charlie, which made possible the difficult communication between East Berlin and West Berlin. So this building is not a glorious building by Peter Eisenman, but when color happens, a little bit of joy shows up. This work, unfortunately, was not built for a great theater and film director, Max Reinhardt. And I think Peter Eisenman did one of his best projects here, although it probably would have had a heavy impact on Berlin if it was built. Look at the plan. These distorted two parts which communicate but also seem to disengage themselves from each other. There is a rift, there is a break into the building. It is as if the earthquake of Haiti struck the building in Berlin. And here you see the model. Of course, it has nothing to do with the context, the urban context. But I think was an engaging, provocative project by Peter Eisenman, and I regret it was not built. So in essence, what we see here is sabotaging the predictability of excessive order. Maybe he started conceiving this work as some kind of a prism, and then he began to subtract from it, to cut from it. He sculpted it both from the inside out and from outside in, and he got this, and you see twisting, there is movement, there is anxiety, there is dissolution, there is disjunction. There are many things that start with the three-letter DIS. Well, here is, I just wanted to show a few images from Max Reinhardt, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I think this is relevant actually to maybe our whole talk tonight, because, I'm not trying to say that Stalin's architecture or the architecture built during Stalin tried to be like the princess here. And deconstruction, meeting Peter Eisenman, represents the monster on the left. Or maybe the earthquake in Haiti is represented by the monster. But it's really about the conjunction between two opposite forces, or two opposite entities. On one hand, sublime being, the princess, and on the other hand, someone who appears to, to belong to a different world, a world of darkness, of lesser beauty, and maybe even the world of being, rooted in terror. The Beauty and the Monster, Midsummer Night's Dream by, well, I don't know who William Dieterle was, but Max Reinhardt was the very name of that building that I just showed by Peter Eisenman. This is a drawing not by Peter Eisenman, but by Lebbeus Woods, showing highly traumatized building. It's more than traumatized, destroyed building by some event, some cataclysm, some catastrophe. But in essence, it's actually, we have the regularity of placid structure, regular and so on, with equidistant floors, and then we see the transformation of this structure into something completely different. Maybe the eruption of irrationality, the eruption of war, the eruption of what was suppressed. And perhaps we should think about both. Well, this is one member of, Pink Floyd, who says here, but not in English, but I can approximate what he says now. It's about emotions. We need to express emotions in architecture as well. Picture from A Midsummer Night's Dream directed, yeah, we saw this one. Here is again, the dark forest, and then the angelic beings, dancing Apollonian in an Apollonian way around the dark trees. Musée du Quai Branly, Paris, a project. I go quickly now because again, we still have to see a few things. Bibliothèque de Lille in Geneva, Switzerland, was not built. But what he wanted to do was not very different from what we saw, well, less sublimely abstracted and artistic in Haiti, in 2010. Now, a church competition in Rome for the Church of the Millennium, which was actually won not by him, but by his cousin, Richard Meyer. And I like more the project by Peter Eisenman, but it was not built. There are actually two churches or two parts. It's a divided church. He likes the rift. He likes the break. We saw it in that house where he broke a poor bathroom into spaces with a very narrow space between them. But this could have been an interesting project. But he didn't build it. He didn't win, and I'm sure he had no chance to win with something like this. So schismatic, but in a way adequately, because the Christian religion is divided into two. No, Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Christianity. So you have the rift right there in the very essence and reality of Christianity. Eisenman probably was correct. I don't know if this is what he referred to, but anyway, this is the building that won the competition and was built. In fact, you see it built here by Richard Meyer. Much less adventurous, much less provocative, and that's why it won. The Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, which even his former friend Kenneth Frampton admires, or at least accepts. It's a good work, yes. And it's abstract. It's surprisingly, other, so to speak, in the middle of Berlin. I mean, look at the, just a second. Yeah. Look at the plan here. These stones that symbolize, symbolize death. And it's in a way a large cemetery. It's a memorial. If you travel to Berlin, you most surely saw it. And I think it is indeed one of his better works. And we see life, we see the people moving around these prismatic gray bodies, abstract bodies, and bodies of architecture, that is, various heights, and there are certain fluctuations in terms of the height, and very there is order, but there is also disorder. It's amazing that Berlin built something like this. I mean, you can imagine this is a very large space in the center of Berlin, and Peter Eisenman did it. Now that these people are not supposed to sit on these things, but they do, and in a way I'm glad they do, because a life moves on, and doesn't mean necessarily disrespect. It just means that life moves on. You'll see even people jumping from yes, because always in the end life asserts itself just as nature asserts itself. Here, so this whole work is by Peter Eisenman, but here on the left you see a building by Frank Gehry. It's a bank, a rather spectacular bank, not so much towards the street, but it's inner space. Anyway, the tourists taking pictures on standing up on the memorial, which was supposed to generate feelings of remorse and even sadness perhaps, and regrets, but there is also an underground part to this memorial with, kind of a museum. Yeah, so this is the building by Frank Gehry, and this is the Holocaust memorial by Peter Eisenman. A memorial to the Holocaust in Budapest. This has nothing to do with Peter Eisenman, except that it is another Holocaust memorial, and it's in Budapest, and I think it's very moving. It's very moving just with these, pairs of shoes, sculpted as they are, which say a lot. They say a lot. All these shoes at the edge of water are in their silent testimony. I think they are very moving. A Holocaust should never happen again, never again. But the war in Ukraine seems to say that we learn nothing. As Rem Koolhaas said, we human beings learn nothing. And back to Berlin and the child who says life is more important, but respect for tragedy that happened is important as well. Anyway, the geometry of Peter Eisenman and the shadows of human beings jumping from one block to another. A bus stop in Aachen, a work I like. It's a bus stop, it's just a bus stop, but we have to confess, is interesting. It's very carefully designed and built, and it is why should a bus stop be put you to death? I mean, sorry, put you to sleep. I saw this person here who seems to sleep, but it seems that even the one done by Peter Eisenman has this effect, or maybe the bus was late. Anyway, an interesting bus stop, I think, by Peter Eisenman. So you see, it's possible even with a bus stop to do something engaging, something interesting, something that unsettles you a little bit. I like it. City of Culture of Galicia. This is a very large work he did, one of his latest works in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And he wanted to create some kind of a landscaped architecture or landscape architecture. where the building becomes a landscape, but a landscape covered in stone, a stone put to work by man, as you can see here. A concrete building and steel building and glass building, lots of it covered with stone, but creating the feeling that it's some kind of a unnatural landscape. There is more fluidity here than in other works by Peter Eisenman that we saw. So he was becoming a little bit more organic, so to speak, a lot of stone here, and he uses even color, unfortunately not so much inside, but outside, discreetly in pastel colors, but they are still colors. Now, of course, people could say, well, what are those, sloping plains? What is this? What is happening underneath? They are capricious. They are, but nature is capricious so very often, including in the terrible, terrible, terrible earthquake in Haiti in 2010. I'm not trying to say that we should bring violence to the world in the same way, but here it is an architecture that maybe turns against itself. You will see also insinuations of the greed. Here he uses kind of two systems: the organic one and the geometrical one. And the geometrical one you see here, and you see it better from the top of the building. And we are going to see some pictures. A lot of stone here was used in order to cover this undulating landscaped architecture. Here on the left, we saw a picture early, if you remember, him and John Haydock. In that picture, he was on the left and John Haydock, the big man, on the right. He was the author of this, but it was built by his friend Peter Eisenman after John Haydock died. So these two towers is actually almost an identical tower built twice, but one is transparent and one is opaque. This is the work of John Haydock. This building, the City of Culture, is by Peter Eisenman. I wonder what Stalin would have thought of this building. We'll never know. Although we don't know either if, well, we cannot go into that. What will happen in the beyond if, let's say, one day maybe Peter Eisenman will meet Stalin in the sky or wherever. Somebody told me that it must be beautiful in the world beyond, in the beyond, because we never saw one returning from there. Look here, it was still during the construction, and we still see the so-called misery of the building site. Yeah. And these are the two things, I don't know how to call them, by John Haydock. Is it an earthquaked architecture here? Not really, because there is still organization, but it's an organization based on different principles. So the will of the architect is still present, and the turbulence is intended, but not to fatal consequences. It's huge. It's huge. And, here we see in the model perhaps better that the buildings became landscape. The buildings became hills and mountains and valleys. Santiago da Compostela, Spain, Peter Eisenman. So you see the buildings are kind of eroded, no? It's as if the spaces are excavated or excavated, if there is such a word, and if there isn't, maybe it should be or could be, inside these artificially created mounds and hills. Unfortunately, the interiors, for my taste, they are too septic and too whitish and too glittering and polished on the floor. It's almost in contradiction with that and terror firma, unless you refer to the white terror, the one his friend John Haydock wrote about when he commented on the Hollywood movie The Shining with Jack Nicholson, that there could be terror in whiteness too. I'm talking about John Haydock, who created this pair of towers. Anyway, moving forward, we are still in Santiago de Compostela with the City of Culture. And I don't know what this is, anonymous.com, Peter Eisenman. That's it. So let's wish him well. No, because it's not his birthday today. So I end the presentation today right now. Thank you for being here.